I'm poet and writer Kay Spivey. I'm gonna go ahead and do my wrap up for the Poetreadathon. I did not read like half the number of books I thought I was gonna be able to, which was stupid of me because I had a lot going on in April. There was just a ton going on. Friends of mine got married. I got my first COVID vaccine. I got to see my parents and my grandma, who I haven't seen in over a year, but thankfully they're all vaccinated now. There's been a lot going on, but I got to read some great poetry books, and I did my best to fill out my Poetreadathon bingo board. Even kind of really trying to fudge it and giving myself 3-for-1s in a few places, I didn't quite make an actual bingo. I thought I was going to be able to, but in total, my generous offer to myself, including the free space, gave me 12 boxes, which, considering there are 25 boxes, I actually did really well. I just didn't quite get a bingo. But we're going to go through them all. First up, I think you would know if you've been here, I did a reading vlog as well as a live show with Shelley Flowers Reads and Writes about Deaf Republic. Deaf Republic checked 2 different boxes for me. It checked read a book of poetry by a deaf author. Shelley Flowers handed that one straight over to me. It also checked for me read a book of poetry by an author who practices a different religion from you. Eli Kaminsky is Jewish. Since I have talked about this book at length on this channel, I won't go too much more into it. If you're interested in my thoughts and opinions, check out our live show. I will go ahead and link it down below. Next up, I read just the most gorgeous cover. Just take a moment and look at that. I love this. I read The Octopus Museum by Brenda Shaughnessy. This was a very interesting book. I started off not entirely sure I would classify it as poetry. It was very train of thought, but as we got into the story, like the narrative of it, I started to understand what we were doing. We were like in a different world. This is a very like environmentalist collection. We are looking back at the past of Earth through this museum. We're like aliens almost looking back at this museum, and all of these are little snapshots of like places where humanity went wrong or things they could have done better and all of these things, and it ties together in this really interesting story. And so as I was getting into it, I was really getting into it, but it is more of kind of a train of thought style. It did take a little bit for me to get it, and then I was really interested. Like, it's very environmentalist. So if you're interested in something like that, this is a great collection. It checked 2 boxes for me, because like I said, I'm fudging boxes, but this was written by Brenda Shaughnessy, who is Japanese American. Grew up in Okinawa, Japan. It checked the box for read a book of poetry by an Asian author, and it also checked the box for read a book of poetry by a poet who is an Aries or a Taurus, because she was born at the end of March and thus is an Aries. The next book that I read might be the book I've had around for the longest, I think, and that is my Rimbaud collection, A Season in Hell. This is a fascinating collection. He almost writes the way an angry teenager would write today, rather than the way you would think someone would write in his time. You can tell that the style was not the style of his time. This style would go a lot better with like Allen Ginsberg than it would contemporary poets of his time. He was angry, he had something he needed to say, he was very skeptical of the world. Because this is a translation, this particular translation, I would warn you that it uses the N-word. And it uses it several times, and I am not 100% sure if all collections of translations would also use the N-word. I stopped and looked it up because especially there's one poem in particular where it's used quite a bit, to the point where it was a little startling. The word he is using, because of the context of the poem, it probably is a correct translation. However, the word in French that is being used doesn't have the same connotation in French that it has when they translate it to the N-word in English. The same word, fascinatingly enough, is also the word that is currently used today for ghostwriter. So I'm not 100% sure that it isn't just this particular translation that chose to use that word, or if that would have been the context of the word that he would have used, but go into this one cautiously because I was surprised, and luckily in this collection I could see, because this one has like the French half and the English half, I could see the French version, I could look it up. But again, yeah, it uses the N-word. It's an interesting collection for sure. It's very strange, very old, very angry, but I'm glad I finally read it. This collection I have put for Read a Book of Poetry, originally published 100 plus years ago. I believe this one was published in the 1800s initially. Oh, it was first translated into English in 1854. Of course, used as my Read a Translated Book of Poetry because it was written in French. And I snuck it on in there for Read a Book of Poetry by a member of the LGBTQ plus community. He is well known for his torrid affair with another poet who was a man. There's not a lot said about his like actual identifying sexuality because at the time he would not have identified as gay, but it's a famous thing about him, and I did not get around to reading my Carol Ann Duffy collection, which I was going to use for that category, so thus I gave myself a 3-pointer. Next up, I read half of this. Are you proud of me? Look at where my split is there. Half of this big honking collection, selected poems of Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes is a fascinating poet. He is really well known for some of his more political poetry. He was big on the Harlem Renaissance. His poetry, I think people would be surprised to read it today. It's a little bit more song-like. A lot of it is a little more like an Insta poet, actually. Maybe I could give myself an Insta poet one and get myself almost to, that's not gonna give me a bingo either. Alright, we won't fudge it. But Langston Hughes kind of writes in more of that smaller, pithier style, but also very much like a song, all of the poems. And to be fair, it could have been like his early works and his later works, and I've only read the early ones. But what fascinated me the most in this collection is how often, and I'm talking like 20 poems in a row, will be written from the perspective of a woman. And as far as I know, he did not identify himself within the LGBTQ plus community, but it was really interesting, and a lot of people have often speculated that he may have been gay, but more interestingly, that he wrote so many of his poems from the perspective of a girl or a woman. I thought was interesting. I considered sticking him into the LGBTQ plus category as well, but I thought that's a little less solid than Rimbaud. So this one, of course, I chose for Read a Book of Poetry by a Black author, and I'm also going to count this as Read a Book of Poetry by an author older than 60. He lived to just past 60, and this collection is now much older than that. So were he still alive and with us today, he'd be very old actually, so never mind, but I'm gonna count it. I'm gonna count it for author older than 60. And I also read Memoria by Michelle Flores. This collection was really good. I counted for my Read a Book of Poetry. It published in 2021. It just came out. It counts for Read a Chapbook because it's less than 60 pages, and Read a Book of Poetry by a Latinx author. So I gave myself a 3 for also. This is a beautiful collection about identity and heritage and family and grief and loss, and it seemed so personal, but like it was telling you a story, like you were invited to learn about her culture and her family and the history that culminated from those things. It was just really beautiful. I was tearing up in a couple places while I was reading this. And I can see why this won a chapbook contest, because it is really stunning. I would definitely recommend you pick up this one. So those are all the books that I read for the Poetreadathon in April this year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you go and check out some of these, and also if you participated in the Poetreadathon, I would love to know which books you read. Did you get bingo? I was so close in so many places. Like really, I needed to go through my pile and just like pick and choose a little better. And I think if we're doing this again next year, I'm gonna be a little more strategic, and maybe I won't be quite so busy in April. That would be great. All right, that's all from me. I will talk to you again very soon. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. And hopefully you are also able to get your COVID vaccine very soon. I was pretty happy about getting mine. It definitely hurt the first night, but it's 2 days past right now, and I don't even, it feels fine. I feel totally good. I can't wait for the next one. That one we'll talk to you about if that one does anything wonky to me, but really I did totally fine for the first one. So I hope you go and get your shot, and yeah, thanks for watching. Bye!